So Foot, and Foot grew up together and were the best of friends. They did everything together until one day Foot fell ill. So Foot and Foot took Foot to the doctor. The doctor examined Foot and then told Foot and Foot the bad news that Foot doesn't have long to live. But to make him as comfortable as possible. So Foot and Foot take Foot home and make him as comfortable as possible until one day Foot dies. Foot and Foot mourn. But they go on with their lives until one day Foot becomes ill. So Foot takes Foot to the same doctor that Foot and Foot took Foot to when Foot became ill. The doctor examines Foot and tells Foot that unfortunately Foot has the same thing Foot had and doesn't have long to live. But that Foot should try to make him as comfortable as possible. So Foot takes Foot home and tries to make him as comfortable as possible. But one day Foot passes away. Foot is exceedingly sad but manages to go on with his life until one day Foot becomes ill. So Foot goes to the same doctor that Foot and Foot took Foot to and that Foot took Foot to when Foot and Foot took ill. The doctor examines Foot and tells him the bad news that he doesn't have long and that he's going to die. At that point, Foot turns to the doctor and says, "That's impossible. I've already got 3 feet in the grave." Note: this is my father's absolute all-time favorite joke. He has spent years and years perfecting the story. It's best said while speaking as fast as possible. I hope you enjoy it as much as he does. A man was really stressed, and his wife put her foot down and finally, I made him do something about it. She told him he needed to buy a pet because she read that pets reduce stress. So he takes an Uber to the pet store and is greeted by the owner, a very attractive woman. Surprisingly, she suggests buying a couple dozen snails because they are very relaxing. After the purchase, they continue talking, and thinks he took pee and she asks him to come upstairs to her apartment. They make love all afternoon and evening, and he falls asleep in her arms, the most relaxed he's been in some time. About 2 a.m., he wakes up freaking out because his wife will be furious. Since it's Salute, the owner of the owner often the pet store offers to drive him home. He grabs his box of snails, and they take off. She drops him off a block away, and as he's walking up the drive, he trips over a garden hose, and the snails go flying. He gets to his feet, and sees his little snails on the ground around him. At that moment, his wife throws open the door, mad as hell, and he yells, "Where have you been?" He looks at her and then back at his snails and says, "Come on, little fellas, we're almost home. Good job guys, we finally made it." A young blonde was on vacation in the depths of Louisiana. She wanted a pair of genuine alligator shoes in the worst way, but was very reluctant to pay the high prices the local vendors were asking. After becoming very frustrated with the no haggle attitude of one of the shopkeepers, the blonde shouted, "Maybe I'll just go out and catch my own alligator so I can get a pair of shoes at a reasonable price." The shopkeeper said, "By all means, be my guest. Maybe you'll luck out and catch yourself a big one." Determined, the blonde turned and headed for the swamps, setting out to catch herself an alligator. Later in the day, the shopkeeper was driving home when he spotted the young woman standing waist-deep in the water, shotgun in hand. Just then, he saw a huge 9-foot alligator swimming quickly toward her. She took aim, killed the creature, and with a great deal of effort hauled it on to the swamp bank. Lying nearby were several more of the dead creatures. The shopkeeper watched in amazement. Just then the blonde flipped the alligator on its back and, frustrated, shouted out, "Damn it, this one isn't wearing any shoes either." A wife arrived home after a long shopping trip and was horrified to find her husband in bed with a young, lovely thing. Just as she was about to storm out of the house, her husband stopped her with these words, "Before you leave, I want you to hear how this all came about. Driving home, I saw this young girl, looking poor and tired. I offered her a ride. She was hungry, so I brought her home and fed her some of the roast you had forgotten about in the refrigerator. Her shoes were worn out, so I gave her a pair of your shoes that you didn't wear because they were out of style. She was cold, So I gave her that new birthday sweater you never wore even once because the color didn't suit you. Her slacks were worn out, so I gave her a pair of yours that you don't fit into anymore. Then, as she was about to leave the house, she paused and asked, "Is there anything else that your wife doesn't use anymore?" And so, here we are. A hunchback and a guy with a club foot meet each Friday at the pub. One Friday, lamenting their disabilities, they complained about the length of their walk. "It would be great shortcut through the cemetery," says the guy with the hunchback. "That cemetery is haunted, D," says the guy with the club foot. "It's madness to walk through there at night." After enjoying their evening, suitably sozzled, the pair headed home. On reaching the cemetery, the guy with the hunchback says, "I'm sick of walking around here. I'm taking the shortcut through." "On your own head," exclaims his pal. Falling over the top of the fence, the hunchback lands heavily, picks himself up, and dusts himself off. As he walks through the cemetery, he hears a Fiant's voice. "Hey, you." He can't see anything. "Hey, you will." Still nothing. "Over here." The hunchback looks around and sees a little boggart sitting atop a tombstone. "What's that?" asks the boggart, pointing. "That's my hunch," says the hunchback. "Guys it!" screams the boggart, and with that, it steals the hunch and runs off. Amazed, the hunchback man stands up straight for the first time in decades and merrily makes his way home. Next Friday in the pub, he regales his tale to his pal with the club foot. "Incredible," says the clubfoot man. "I'm going through that cemetery tonight. I wouldn't recommend it," says his now straight-backed friend. That boggart had a nasty look about him. "Away," replies the club-footed pal. "Look how well it worked out for you." Sure enough, as the night ends, the clubfoot drunk jumps the fence into the cemetery. As he walks ahead, he hears a wee voice. "Hey, you." He looks around and sees nothing. "Hey, you wilda," is the cry. Again, the club-footed gentleman looks around, to no avail. "Over here." The drunkard looks down and sees a boggart perched atop a tombstone. "What's that?" it asks, pointing at his foot. "That's my club foot," says the drunk. "Here, have a hunch too." A man walks through the African wildlands and sees an elephant in distress. He goes close to it, but slowly, knowing that they can become enraged very quickly. Upon closing in on it, the elephant stops trumpeting and looks at the man. There was a minute of intense staring between the two, and the man noticed an obvious mark on one of Tusk's, like a tiny dark gray diamond. Slowly, the elephant raises its leg to show the man its hoof. The man sees a metal pole sticking out of it. The elephant keeps its intense gaze upon him as he slowly makes his way forward. Approaching the elephant, and gives a gaze idly gentle on its leg. The elephant respects this sloth by raising and lowering its trunk and seemingly pointing at the pole. The man thinks "T-okay, go." Grabs the pole and with on swift pull, yanks the pole out and stumbles backwards. The elephant slowly places its foot on and gestures his trunk to the man. He gets up and gently strokes it. A few minutes later, pedant turns and walks away. Away. Later, Alaturn goes to the zoo in his local town with his son. They walk past the elephant exhibit. The man notices an elephant with an obvious mark on its tusk lattice, grade. "No, surely not," thoughts the man. He reads about the elephant apparently being taken from Africa 9 months ago to this enclosure. Pant suddenly looks up and starts to gesture with his trunk. The man realized that would very well be the same elephant. He tells his son to watch as he climbs over the railings into the enclosure. A panicked zookeeper at him, but he needs to see the elephant again. The man slowly approaches the elephant, while it gestures with its trunk. Slowly, elephant starts to lift its leg. His trunk reaches the man's outstretched hand. They touch again gently. Pant then grabs the man in his trunk, trumpets loudly, ams him he highs into the ground, snapping his neck and killing him instantly. So, sight, it probably wasn't the same elephant.